The weather, a legit Jags team, and getting down early, facing some adversity for the first time in the season. The Eagles are still the only unbeaten team in the NFL after 4 weeks, 4-0. I'm Jesse Taylor. I'm here this week with Shane Haff as well as Rachel as always. It wasn't pretty at times. There were definitely some things to clean up today. The weather was a factor a little bit, but there were some uncomfy moments, but for, some injuries to keep an eye on as well. But ultimately, Shane, the Eagles walk away with a win. And this was one where, everyone was talking about throughout the week that, it started off as they were, it was just the Lions. And then the Lions actually, win a couple legit games and, it's still just the Lions. And then it's just the Commanders and the Vikings are terrible. But, it's a test leading up to it. But then everyone wants to downplay what the Eagles do. This was the first time everyone was kind of saying this Jags team is legit. Look what they did to the Chargers last week. Do people give the Eagles the credit they deserve now, or is it still just the Jags?
I hope so. I said the Jags are the most difficult team the Eagles will play until late November. I'm really high on the Jags. And so to see the Eagles overcome a bad start, bad weather, several injuries, and to fight back, they really haven't had to score in the second half so far this year. So to see them put together, I don't know if we can say a 4-quarter performance because they really slacked off the first quarter, but to string at least 2 halves of football together was really good to see.
Yeah. And I think you made a good point. They didn't have to score. And I think that's been one of the criticisms of the Eagles up to this point, right? It's like, they haven't really scored in the second half, but also they haven't needed to. It hasn't gotten uncomfortable. They haven't been in a situation where they have, it comes down to it and you say, okay, you need to go score here or we're in trouble. And that was what the Eagles had to do today. And, it was very pleasant to see the outcome of what that kind of, being up against that kind of question mark and how they were able to go forward.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you look at the last couple of weeks and up 24 scored 24 in the first half of each of the last 2 games, up, varying degrees off of that. I wouldn't say they took their foot off the gas, but it was more about controlling the ball, controlling the clock. You wondered what would happen. If it continued to not score in the second half, it could become something that you have to worry about. And they put that narrative to bed, and they did it behind, 2 backup offensive linemen on a day where it was really hard to throw the football. Miles Sanders sets a career record for rushing yards in a game, and he does it against the best run defense in the league. The Jags were only allowing 55 yards per game on the ground, and the Eagles rushed for over 200, proving that, they'd been real pass heavy the first 3 weeks, but they can still run the ball, and they can do it in bad conditions when they need to.
Yeah. And I thought the good thing about it was, the conditions were bad and they got worse, right? So by the second half, they were, the winds were up to 20 miles an hour. And I think on the broadcast, they were saying something like once it hits that 15 mile per hour mark, that's when quarterbacks say they start to really feel it. And that's when it starts to really impact what they're doing. And, the only thing that I think it genuinely, impacted the Eagles was on that one extra point where there was just that enormous gust of wind as the ball went in the air and it completely took it off, to the right. But other than that, they were still able to, I think their game plan was adjusted a little bit based on the weather. They definitely were more run heavy than they've been the last couple weeks, but it didn't change their identity as a team. And it didn't really change what they were going to do. And they were still able to accomplish all of the things they wanted to do, both on the ground and in the air, I thought, or, it looked like when in, previous years, think about, the issues with drops the Eagles have had that, you'd close your eyes every time, whoever was under center dropped back to throw a ball when there was any sort of weather issue.
Yeah. You even just think about other contenders in the league, teams like the Bills or the Rams or the Buccaneers. They would really struggle in a game like that. They don't have a running game, and being explosive through the air is really important, but to be able to grind out, you might have a snow game in December and January or a rain game like this. And so to be able to win in multiple ways on offense, it's really key. And last year the Eagles could win on the ground. They really couldn't win through the air. This year they'd shown the opposite. They hadn't had to win on the ground, but they showed today that they can when they have to.
Right. And I thought, you brought up an excellent point a little bit ago that, I feel like we need to touch on is this is the first time that they've actually been bitten a little bit by some injuries in a game so far this season. And they were still able to continue that ground game, as you said, even behind, two backup linemen. So, obviously they didn't have Avonte Maddox today. They didn't have Boston Scott today. We knew that going into the game. But as soon as the game started, you lose Darius Slay almost immediately. You lose Jordan Mailata almost immediately. And you think, oh my God, not only do we lose Jordan Mailata, and not that it's anything positive to have necessarily a backup lineman in there, but you don't even have your typical backup left tackle because Andre Dillard's on IR after breaking his arm, at the end of camp. So you have to go in and have Jack Driscoll out there who has been playing for you on the right side since he has been a member of this team. So you that's a little bit of a question mark there. And then you see Isaac Seumalo go down, and so Opeta had to play a decent amount last week as well. But, didn't change them at all. You didn't even notice that they had backup guys in there on that line. They still controlled every aspect of it.
Yeah, Jeff Stoutland is the best position coach in the 100%. NFL. Doesn't get enough credit.
No.
And all of these are guys that the Eagles have drafted. They've developed over time. Sua Opeta, Jack Driscoll. And it can't be overstated how difficult it is switching sides of the line. I mean, Eagles fans will remember Andre Dillard getting in his head about switching to right tackle. That's a hard thing. Everything is backwards. All the footwork, all the hand, it's all backwards. And so you throw him out there. He's not played left tackle. And he holds his own. I mean, the only time I really noticed him was when he got pushed back into Hurts for that sack. And I think it was in the third quarter or something like that. Gave him a 2nd and 20, ended up killing a drive. That's really the only time you even noticed Driscoll. And they were putting Goddard on that side to help chip block a little bit. But the Eagles offense adjusted, on bad weather, playing behind backup guys. There was a lot of jet motion. It was a very collegey offense today. And it's not how you want to make your living every week, but they could do it in a pinch when they needed to.
Yeah. I remember Trey Thomas saying when Andre Dillard made that shift over to right tackle, we had him on, Sam and I for Babes on Broad were doing a pregame show during COVID because we couldn't go to the game. So we were trying to do something fun. And we had Trey Thomas on one week with us and we asked him, how hard is that kind of switch from a lineman's perspective? And he was like, okay, think about in school when you used to take essay tests in a 45-minute class period. If you walked into an essay test and you were prepared, you were ready to go, you had your outline, you were ready for everything, but your teacher forced you to write it with your non-dominant hand. That's what it's like. And we were both like, oh, that's a wild thing to think about, So I thought that they did, those guys did a really good job. And you're right. That was probably the only thing that was the negative was, he got tripped up a little bit, tripped up Jalen Hurts and essentially caused that sack there. But, the next man up mentality that they had a couple of years ago when they went out and won the Super Bowl with 7 starters on IR, that was something that we saw today. And even with it on the defensive side as well, having Josiah Scott have to step in for Avonte Maddox, who had been playing extremely, extremely well up to this point. That was, again, first quarter was a little hairy as they were trying to figure it out here and there, but ultimately they were able to figure that out. And then you lose Darius Slay and have to bring Zach McPherson in as well. Those guys who, you sat there and you're like, okay, this is the defense. Now we're going to see something like we saw last year when you couldn't really rely on the corners you had. Obviously you had Darius Slay, but the opposite side was a little bit of a question mark. You didn't notice an enormous drop off. And I think that's so huge going forward, especially because the defense was able to continue dominating as they had these last couple weeks.
Yeah, the Eagles pass rush made up for a lot of potential coverage bust situations. Obviously, they harassed Trevor Lawrence. Lawrence fumbles 4 times on the day. So the pass rush helps the coverage. The coverage helps the pass rush. Today, it was a lot more your pass rush helping your coverage. I mean, there were some coverage busts that the Jags didn't make the Eagles pay for. And that happens when you have Josiah Scott and Zach McPherson out there trying to pass routes off to safeties that they don't routinely practice with. The Eagles like to run a lot of match coverage, and there were some coverage busts. I thought they got out of some of those match looks early in the game because of that. but they were still able to string together defense behind it. And a lot of it, I think, started up front with the pass rush, with Hassan Reddick, with Fletcher Cox, with Josh Sweat getting after Trevor Lawrence.
Yeah. And that was, I mean, one of the highlights of today, right? Like the Eagles could have a third straight NFC Defensive Player of the Week, and potentially with Hassan Reddick, because they four fumbles, four fumble recoveries, 5 takeaways total. The interception by James Bradbury, which was tremendous. And then, Trevor, they talked about it on the broadcast. Like they asked him, would you ever consider wearing gloves? And he was like, no, I don't like gloves. Well, Trevor, you probably should have thrown some gloves on today, my friend, because you could not hold on to that football if your life depended on it. And the Eagles made him pay. There were several, guys that, Hassan Reddick, one of them, was it one of them or both of them, where he actually, he had the strip sack and recovered the fumble?
I know he recovered that last one. I don't know if he recovered the first one. I can't remember who fell on it. I know Brandon Graham tried to scoop up that last one and he missed it, and then Hassan Reddick fell on it. I think Reddick recovered both, but I can't remember.
I know he had 2 recoveries, but I can't remember if he was the one who knocked both of them out.
Yeah, I know he knocked 2 out. I just don't. He knocked 2 out and he recovered 2. I don't know if they were the same.
Yeah, and honestly, who cares? But that in itself, like that's something that we hadn't seen from this Eagles team the last 2 years or so. And one of the things that made them so great in 2017 was their ability to get home and their takeaways. And that's something that they have been showing finally, because there isn't necessarily a spot on their defense that has to consistently pick up the slack of there's not a weak point. Their safeties are, if you had to name a weak point, I would say maybe their safeties are the weak point of the defense. But again, you're not constantly relying on one or the other. They're working in harmony for the first time in years, and it's showing on the stat sheet for the first time in years.
Yeah, if you pressed me on a weak point for the defense, I would say it's the secondary depth. Like sure. The Eagles' starting trio of cornerbacks is really good. There's not really anyone else that I feel comfortable with on the field. I don't feel comfortable with Josiah Scott or Zach McPherson out there. Kayvon Wallace, if somebody in that starting 5 goes down and it's not a tremendously rainy game with wind gusts, yeah, I think you would probably feel that a lot more. So that is one area of concern moving forward, especially if, Slay or Maddox were to miss extended time. I think if you're pinpointing a place the Eagles really can't afford to lose guys, it is their starters in the secondary, because there's just not much proven depth there.
Yeah, 100%. 100%. So, and looking forward with this, so the Eagles, who's next? They go down to Arizona. Correct? Okay. So they head out to Arizona next week, followed up by coming back home and a Sunday night football matchup against the Dallas Cowboys, who, is that game over? Did they win that game?
They're going to win if it's not over. They were up like 12 with a few minutes left.
Right. And, the Commanders are just, oh yeah. 25-10 loss for the Washington football team. So, the Cowboys are still playing not good football, but decent enough football to continue winning without Dak Prescott. Dak might come back next week anyway. Apparently he started throwing this week, looking to come back next week. So I think you're absolutely dead on when you say this is probably this was the Eagles' toughest game until November. But when you look at the injuries that they have, and especially in that secondary, a team that could get hot and hurt you are the Arizona Cardinals. So if these 2 guys are to have to miss any sort of extended time, that you're absolutely right, I think, is where if you had to have again, they're 4-0, you don't want to be doom and gloom right now, but if you had to have a concern about this team, that might be an area where it could be questionable or have a little bit of discomfort.
Yeah, and the Cardinals, they don't have a great receiver room. DeAndre Hopkins is still out, so he'll miss next week's game. Obviously, they've got Hollywood Brown, who's their deep threat, but he doesn't operate a ton out of the slot. So I'm not super concerned. Hopefully either Slay or Maddox is back. You don't want those guys to both be gone, but I'm not terribly concerned next week looking ahead to the Cardinals. But it is something you want to monitor. You can't have Slay or Maddox, for that matter, missing significant time. And it doesn't sound like that's the case for either guy. Slay was back on the sidelines in the second half.
Right.
Maddox, I think it was supposed to just be an ankle sprain. It wasn't supposed to be a big long-term thing. So hopefully they're back at full strength. But there are a lot of injuries to watch, especially with them traveling cross country this week.
Yeah, and that's the other thing. I feel like when we were talking about this last week, if we were to look at their schedule coming up, the only one that really concerns me is this Arizona game, solely because of the cross-country travel. That's the one thing where, they're 4-0, everything's good, they're answering all the questions, but now they have to travel sort of across the country, time zone differences, the whole thing, and see what goes on there. I definitely agree with this comment from Jonathan Page here. Absolutely credit to Nick Sirianni and Shane Steichen. Not all coaches would adjust and not panic down 14-0. I think that is something that we did tend to see a little bit in the past couple of years. I love Doug, and I'm so happy that the Eagles fans gave the reception that they gave him today. Absolutely well deserved. But that is, was one of my biggest criticisms of him over the, his tenure here was, you get down a little bit, he panicked. Like, he hit that panic button so fast, and the whole game plan changed like that. Instead of sticking to what you could, what you were planning to do and what you're going to be successful with. I thought the Eagles did a phenomenal job of kind of sticking to it and playing their game and making sure that the rest of the game developed in their control, the way that they wanted the game to play. They played their game the way they wanted to and didn't let a deficit get them down.
Yeah, it was the first real test.
Sure.
I feel like it's the first gut check moment. The Lions game, the Lions go on that long opening drive, but there was never like a feeling of panic there. But the Jaguars came out and they punched the Eagles in the mouth, and it's the first time that it happened all season. How are they going to respond? Well, there was no panic, like you said. They stuck with the game plan. They continued to play football. They knew the ball would bounce their way eventually, and they continued to grind away, and they scored, 29 unanswered points. And that feels good because you weren't sure how they would respond until they've been in that situation. And that's what, that's one of the things people have talked about is how are they going to do in a close game? How are they going to do playing from behind? Well, they checked both of those boxes today, and it looked pretty good doing it.
Yeah, they did. I'm wondering, we're going to bring Rachel in here because we have our 3 words to describe the Birds win against the Jags up on Twitter right now. And I'm wondering if I've been so hesitant to ask you this question every week because Twitter just tends to be the, negative Nancy area of the world. Is Twitter as positive about this Eagles win, or is there doom and gloom happening still?
There's still some doom and gloom. You would be surprised.
Why?
I don't know. The first thing I saw when I just opened this one up, it says still not satisfied.
But
this is the
why?
only undefeated team in the league. So I'm like, huh? What?
I don't understand.
So that's what I saw. But you still have this. Somebody said this was our friend Neil. He said smiling through rain. So that was pretty positive. Defense heating up, Super Bowl bound. I see too many injuries, but that's nothing that they can control.
Right.
Weather is undefeated, overcame the elements. It's football weather, booby breakout season. So for the most part, they are positive today, but there are the ones that are, still going to be negative just because.
I see a body bag game out there.
You guys talked about it, pushing through adversity, so that was good. Gannon is him. Okay. All right. Look how things have changed. That was ugly. But yeah, no, the worst one that I saw was still not impressed or still not satisfied.
I'm going to take that to mean that they're not satisfied because we're not 17-0 yet. So
okay.
Maybe I'm going to put a positive spin on that. Say the players, if you ask the players, they'd say they're not satisfied. We could have done some things better. We're going to go with that. That's a positive comment there.
I like that. Way to spin it. Okay, I'll take it.
Let's go with that, because if you're not if you're just grumpy about being 4-0,
yeah,
I don't know what else to do to help you. I don't know what else the Philadelphia Eagles can do that they haven't done for you over the last 4 weeks.
Yeah,
that you would like them to do.
I literally just saw second half scoring, and I know the last few weeks that's one of our nitpicky things, right. And so this week they adjusted, and they answered, so they can't really say that for this week.
It's really nice because one of the things that we did last year and the year before, and whether it was just recording regular episodes for any of the shows at on BGN, the post-game show last year, anything that we did, we had the same conversation week in, week out. What are your keys to success? XYZ. What do they need to adjust? XYZ. What went wrong? The same things. It was the same thing week in, week out. We had the same conversations. And now it's so refreshing to have a different conversation every week, and they're all positive. It's it's weird we talked about this last week. It's weird to try to keep a show going when you have nothing to complain about. But we were, if you get nitpicky and you have one little nitpicky thing one week, the Eagles Shane, as you said, they check the box right afterwards. That's all they've been doing for us. Can
I give them a box to check for next week?
Yes, please.
Get Kenny Gainwell off the field. Get him off.
Yeah.
I was a Trey Sermon guy in the draft. I'm a big draft guy. I was a Trey Sermon guy in that draft. I was thrilled when the Eagles picked him up. I don't understand why the Eagles keep trying to force the ball to Kenny Gainwell. It's not a thing. It doesn't work. It's never worked. And I liked Gainwell in the draft. It's just, he has the interception off his hands in was that the Vikings game?
Mm-hmm.
I just don't like it. Get him off the field. Give Trey Sermon more carries. That's the nitpick. Let's check that box next week.
Yeah, they want, like, Boston Scott is the guy he's like, one of those weird exceptions to the rule. It doesn't make any sense why he has been so successful. There's absolutely no rhyme or reason why he's been able to have like such a good run as an Eagle, or just, on a football field, and why he's still able to be successful when there's so much film out there on him at this point. And they were sort of hoping that lightning would strike twice with Kenny Gainwell, I think. And it's not there, and they're trying to force the issue. It's like when who was it a couple of years ago? It was Corey Clement, and then he sort of trailed off and then did his tour of the NFC East. And who was it that was an undrafted rookie that they brought and tried to do the same thing? Oh, that's going to drive me nuts.
I don't remember.
Right off my head, no, I don't know.
It's going to drive me insane. I want to say
maybe somebody in the comments will know.
Oh my God, who was it? Oh, this is gonna.
I will say, after they ran the wheel route to Gainwell out of the backfield, and it was a high throw from Hurts, but it went off of Gainwell's hands, and I tweeted, just get Gainwell off the field. And then the next play they handed it to him for a touchdown. So I got lit up on Twitter for that one, but it's like, I mean, come on, I could have run through that hole. There was nobody there. The offensive line, just, again, incredible job by the offensive line. And the Jags, I feel like people underestimate what the Jags were. Like, the Jags are a really good football team so far this year. I don't know if it's, they've been bad for so long. They've got a good coach this year. Coming into this game, they were second in total DVOA, second in point differential. They were top 7 in both offensive and defensive EPA per play. They're a good football team. They're a well-coached football team. They've got a good quarterback. He had a rough day with the fumbles today with the rain. But the Eagles just looked good. And again, it's against, I think, the best team that they're going to play for the next several weeks. I think they're better than the Vikings. I think they're better than the Cardinals and the Cowboys. It's a win that Eagles fans should hang their hat on because it was an impressive game.
I saw 2 things that I wanted to note, just how you were talking about the Jaguars and how talented they are. And we knew going into this game, like, one of their strengths was definitely when it came to like their rush defense. And Johnny Page, our friend of the pod who was on here last week, he had actually tweeted out, and he was just talking about how, like, there's not really like a type or like a style of defense that the Eagles offense can't beat. And so as an Eagles fan, like, you have to feel good about that. Like, that's an amazing feeling, just knowing like what they're able to do with their run game. So I just want to throw that out there as well.
Josh Adams.
Okay.
Yes.
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah, that's it.
They tried so hard to make it like they tried so hard to recreate the whole like Corey Clement wonderfulness that was 2017, and it just didn't work. And that's where we are right now with Kenny Gainwell. Okay.
Anytime we talk about running backs, people tried to make a thing. I just can't get Henry Josie out of my head. That's the name I automatically always go to.
Yeah, it's just,
I have another thing being nitpicky. I mean, this is not something that happens often, so I'm not gonna dwell on it. But like, what did y'all think of Dallas Goedert's drop? We
Not
don't see that
ideal.
often, so that's why I was like, I'm not gonna get too high on it. But I was like, what is this?
I would be more angry if the Eagles defense didn't come in and sack Trevor Lawrence and right after, because that would have they wouldn't have had to just kick the field goal. They would have gone up a little bit more. It just would have been a little bit better. But he had another really good, like nice, what was it, 22 or 26-yard reception that following drive as well, to be able to keep them going, to be able to make sure that they were still chewing up clock. So you get a pass for this one.
He's not the most sure-handed guy. Like, he's great after the catch. He'll have a drop here or there. And I mean, that's a tough one. The ball is on his back hip. It was not, the broadcast said it was thrown behind him. That ball was thrown exactly where it's supposed to be. It's still a tough catch, especially in the rain. AJ Brown, same thing on that 4th and 3. The ball was in his hands. The rain plays a
defensive play.
Yeah, the rain plays a role in that. Both of those guys will usually make that catch. And there's things they can clean up. Jason Kelce snapping the ball to Hurts while his hands were in the hand warmer. I mean, the Eagles were lucky that didn't kill a drive. When Driscoll got run back into Hurts for that sack on 1st and 10, like, all of those things potentially could have been big deals. The Driscoll one did kill a drive, but the ball bounced their way some other ways. And so you get through a sloppy game like that, and that's a character building win. And there's things to clean up, and a lot of them are probably weather related. The biggest one for me is, can we just stop? Can we stop getting guys blocking downfield on RPOs? And it was a weak call. It was a weak OPI call on Dallas Goedert. But can we just stop? Like, obviously, officials are looking for that. If you're an RPO team, they're looking for that. That's got to get better. It feels like we take a big play off the board every week on something like that.
Yeah. But I also, to try to spin that in a positive way, the Eagles were down 14-0 at that point when they were going down to score on that drive. And typically, not only being down by 14, but also you add that, that's a, take the wind out of your sails kind of penalty call, right? Like, that's usually a call where you see the Eagles get down and they only walk away with a field goal there. They're on the goal line and they only end up walking away with a field goal because of a penalty that backs them up 20 yards. And then, their next play, it was a no gain as well. So I think that the positive spin on that one specific instance was that's typically a drive and momentum killer, and they still walked away with 7 points on that. So I thought that from the Eagles, and that was one thing that has really stuck in my head from this game, especially, is, that's a time where where I usually hit the panic button, because they walk away with only 3 points there, and you're relying on your defense once again to, go out there and get a stop for you and not go down, 21-3. So, while yes, I agree, we need to stop with those calls, that one, at least, I was impressed with the way that they were still able to walk away with such, a positive ending to that drive.
And credit Sirianni for going for it on 4th down too.
Oh, yeah.
Like, that's absolutely the right call to make in that situation. Mm-hmm. Down 14 with the amount of things that have gone wrong against you. I'm not sure I could have made that call. So I'm glad, he listened to analytics would tell you to go for it. That's absolutely a go for it situation. But I was real nervous when they came out to go for it on 4th down. And, obviously a great run by Hurts to lower the shoulder and get into the end zone.
Yeah. I mean, ultimately, again, there's not much negative to talk about here. They absolutely, gotten a hold of start. They battled back and finished the game. And, any complaints or, negatives about the game are, nitpicky. And you'd prefer to be nitpicky about a good football team that you just want to continue to improve. And, again, the dream of this season, the expectations of the season were, win the division. Don't, fall ass backwards into the playoffs at, 9-7, or what is it, 9-8 now, or whatever, 10-7. and, fall into that, last extra wild card spot that you don't really belong in playoffs if you're in that spot at this point in the NFL. And we saw that last year when that's what the Eagles did. You could tell they did not belong in the playoffs last year. So, it was anything less than winning the division is going to be a disappointment, but anything beyond that was just going to be a bonus because you weren't really sure what you were going to get into this season. They're 4-0 and they're not looking like they're going to slow down anytime soon. So, I'm excited.
Yeah, and huge credit too to Jalen Hurts. He throws the pick 6 early in the game. That was an awful read. He never should have thrown that pass.
Nope.
And it's the worst decision I've seen him make this year.
Absolutely.
And to bounce back, and I mean, he played mistake-free football after that and got his team back into the game, and a lot of it was because of his running ability. I know he didn't have a lot of rushing yards today, but the read option was freeing Sanders up a lot. He played a really good football game after a rough start, and that's a hard thing to do, especially in that type of weather. So a big credit to him as well for bouncing back after a rough start to the game.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's something that, again, one of the biggest complaints over the last couple of years before Jalen Hurts was your starting quarterback was the inability to, have a short memory and be able to continue on and be able to crawl out of a deficit and go out and, win games when your back was against the wall a little bit. So, all the credit to Jalen Hurts, and he's continuing to. You're absolutely right. Worst decision in 4 games he's made, and should not have thrown that ball. But he is doing anything and everything that he needs to for this team to be successful, and he is the reason they're winning games, and not giving you a reason to say, okay, well, they won in spite of him.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm really interested to see how he does next week on the road at Arizona against, another quarterback from his alma mater. It should be a fun, especially here in Oklahoma, that should be a fun game. Everybody's going to be tuned into that one.
Yeah, it's going to be a good one. I'm excited. But, they're 4-0, so let's hope that we're sitting here next week having another, conversation, and they're 5-0. So, thank you guys for joining us for another, BGN Instant Reaction Show. Make sure you're following us on everything, subscribed everywhere. Make sure you're hitting that thumbs up button. We really appreciate it. And thank you so much for, jumping on the comments and stuff with us. Even if we didn't pull up your comment here, we're still seeing all of it on the side here, and really appreciate you guys jumping in with us and responding to the tweets and everything. So thank you again, and we'll talk to you next week. So for myself, Rachel, and Shane, have a good week, and go Birds.
Go Birds.